Why hello there, Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, we are finishing this amazing shed. If you want to learn how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started. This is part 3 and the final culmination of this shed build, and if you haven't checked out part 1 and 2, I'll make sure and leave a link in the bio. But just like the first 2 videos, we have a lot to get to, so let's get right to it. And the first thing we're getting to is the exterior trim. We're using 4" by 5/4" PVC trim from AZEK. This is their AZEK Paint Pro trim, which is an extremely high quality PVC trim that actually is designed specifically to accept paint. Not all PVC trims do that, and the reason why we're using this type of trim is because it's completely 100% waterproof and mold/rot proof, which is exactly what we want, especially in areas where we have a high amount of moisture and it's more prone to rotting over time if we were using a standard wood trim. This product is very easy to cut with your standard general purpose saw blade, and if you want to get in those small tight knit corners like I did to notch things out, I did use my jigsaw, which also cut nicely. One of my favorite things about this trim series is the fasteners itself. They are called AZEK Cortex fasteners, and I've actually used them on multiple decks. The really nice thing about this product is the fact that it's designed specifically for composite materials, and it comes with plugs, which will be plugging all of these holes very shortly. As for trimming out a doorway, I always find it easier to trim out the sides of the door first, making sure that you have it centered on the door casing on the sides as well as centered on the top of the door casing. That way you know for certain you have the right spacing, then you can take your measurement for your top cap and cut that at the exact length. Once I have my door taken care of, I then proceed to the window, and for the windows, I also do like to start with the sides first, get those positioned and installed correctly, and then start installing the bottom and the top plate after that. One thing to keep in mind with the window itself is the fact that you are having to deal with the window flange, which does make things a little uneven sometimes. So if you have to insert a couple small shims on the side in order for the trim to lay flush against the house, that's not going to be a big deal. Just put a couple shims and make it straight. For added waterproofing protection, I do highly recommend installing some Z flashing right above your trim top cap on your window as well as your door. This will provide easy drain off for any moisture that hits the window or the door. Also, after you nail it in place, make sure you apply a small strip of G-tape for added waterproofing protection. This AZEK Paint Pro trim series also has fascia boards, so we picked up some 5/4" by 8" boards that will go around the entire perimeter of our roof rafters. From part 1 and 2, you know our roof is approximately a 312 pitch, which means we have approximately a 13-degree mark that we're going to be cutting our angles out, at least for the fascia boards that are going to be going on the front and the back side of the shed. We found that the easiest way to get perfect alignment is to actually install a scrap board on both sides of the shed. That way we know exactly how far we need to actually protrude out, then make a mark and cut the panels that way. Then pre-drill a few fasteners so you're not trying to attach the fastener while it's hanging on the side, which makes life just a little bit easier, which is always appreciated. Especially when you're hanging over a tall structure, or at least tall-ish. And now, let's get to filling all these holes. The beauty about this fastening system is the fact that they come with these plugs that match the grain structure perfectly as long as you put them in the correct direction of the grain and then gently hammer them in place. It almost completely hides all of the fasteners that you just put in, and you're still able to remove these later on if need be. In my personal opinion, filling all of these holes with a perfect little cap is really satisfying and really doesn't take much time to do. Plus, it gives you a near perfect finish, and as always, I'll leave a link in the description box below if you are interested in purchasing this product or any other products or tools you see on this channel. Now that we have the trim taken care of, it's now time for siding. And for siding, we are using AZEK's shingle siding with Paint Pro technology. So basically the same exact product as the trim itself, just in large shingle sheets. With the siding, there are specific directions to get it installed properly, and the first step is to actually cut small 1.5-inch strips as well as larger 9-inch sections for the starter course. Now, these small tabs can be used later on, but the panels are the real items that we're working with first. The main tool that you're really going to want to have on this job is a nail gun, more specifically a siding coil nailer, but in our circumstance we are actually using a roofing coil nailer. The main reason why we're doing this is because siding nailers really don't have nails that are less than 1.25 inches, and we actually need 3/4 inch and 1 inch long nails in order for us to not pierce the inside of our sheathing. Because we're not going to be actually finishing or putting any type of drywall or anything else on the interior of the shed, I don't want to be looking at the interior of the shed seeing hundreds of nails coming out. Keep that in mind because these nails might differ in length due to the material that you use for your sheathing. As a spacer, we're using one of our starter strips at the very bottom of our drip edge, then laying our starter strip on top of that and nailing it in place. We also utilize this spacer for our 9-inch starter course. Nailing the starter strip and course is fairly straightforward. Just make sure the tabs on your starter course is facing up, not on the bottom. Once it's time to install your shingle panels, the one thing you need to keep in mind with a PVC product is the fact that you either need to apply a small dollop of adhesive on the very bottom of each tab, or after they're all installed, nail them in place. Because I want as few penetrations going into our drip edge as possible, I do decide to use the AZEK Fill and Flex adhesive, which is specifically designed for this type of PVC product, but I only do it for the first row. All the other ones, I'll nail them in place after all the shingles are in place. You'll see what I mean shortly. As for cutting these shingles down, it's hard to cut this 16-inch long strip in one long pass, which is why I cut each shingle with 2 passes. The first cut is on your tab side because that's where people are actually going to see the shingle, but the second pass is on the top side because that's where your shingle overlap is going to be, and even if you screw up on that cut, no one's going to see it. At first, I thought I was going to use a laser level for the entire leveling portion of this project, but quickly realized the laser level was just not stable enough and there was going to be a lot of work needed to do that, which is why a beautiful chalk line, which is much less of a headache, is perfect for this application. I mark points on both sides approximately 7 inches away from each other and then snap a chalk line which provides a perfect straight line all the way across. As far as nailing is concerned, you want to stay within 1/2 inch to 1 inch above where each slot is in the shingle. If you go too high, you might bend the shingle sheet awkwardly, but if you go too low, you might have a chance of breaking through into the tab itself, and you're supposed to be nailing right above each tab as well as the ends. I did go high in some areas, but after I got the hang of it, it was really consistent all the way across. Okay, so now that we got the whole rigmarole down, I will explain. So each section gets a full piece, which is 48 inches, then a 32, then a 16. But you got to remember, each one is a fresh piece. You can't just cut it at 32 inches and see you have a 16 and a 32 because you need this little guy right there, and right there, because that's where the fresh piece starts. And if you don't, then all these tabs will at a certain point align together and it won't look good. So make sure fresh cut from this corner over here, here, and then the scrap goes on that side. Easy enough. As we work our way up to the top of our shed, we do run into all of our roof rafters. And because this is going to be one beautiful shed, we need to notch every single one out. And I assure you, there's no half-assing on this project, which is why we're going to be notching out every single one of our shingles in order to bring the shingles up to the very top of our roof rafters. Might take a little extra time to do this, but this really does provide a beautiful and professional finished look in the end. Use your chop saw to cut each side, then score the very bottom, break it off, and guess what? You got a perfect piece for each specific rafter. But just keep in mind that just because the top of this shingle sheet made it to the top of the roof rafters doesn't mean we're done, because we have to cover all of these nail holes again with another row, which again takes a little extra time but provides a beautiful professional look in the end. However, at this point and for this row, we are actually using a finish nailer to nail off these sheets and any other correlating top pieces that we install, because any nail that we shoot into at this point will be seen later on. As we move on to the other sides of the shed, it's basically the same exact process, but on the front side, because it's such a small section, I do try and use up some of the scrap, which did get a bit tricky when trying to avoid the grooves running into each other. Just keep that in mind if you do have small sections that you have to account for and can't use full pieces. When notching around a window or any other item, the easiest way to determine how much you have to cut off is to basically account for how much space you have as the reveal and then determine how much space you still need. For example, if I only have 5 inches of reveal on the bottom section and I need 7, that means I need to cut off 2 inches on the top portion of the shingle. Hopefully that made sense, and if it doesn't, please let me know in the comments section below. When installing siding around a window or a door, the one thing to be mindful of is the fact that because you don't have the siding butting up next to each other on each side of the door or window, means you have to be very accurate with your spacing on both sides, because you don't want to get to the very top of the door or window and all of a sudden things don't line up properly. To make life easier, I did strike a line across the very bottom of the window, which basically provides a perfect measuring layout across both sides of the window, so I don't have an odd spacing between the two sides once I get above the window. As for the angle needed at the very top of the shed in the front and the back, just remember we can use that 13-degree mark that we've used previously, and if we need to cut it in a very large section, we can always draw a line and use the table saw to cut a crisp line all the way down the panel. Not the easiest thing to do, but it works. I wanted to say a big special thank you to the AZEK team, because they actually did provide all the AZEK materials for this project, and I personally actually loved working with it. The fact that you have products like this that come from recycled materials that are 100% waterproof and have a lifetime warranty, you can't beat that, and I absolutely love the finished look on this shed. I'll leave a link in the description of this video on where you can learn more about this product, as well as where you can actually purchase this product if you are interested in your next project. And as I noted before, after we have all the shingles in place, I do go back and finish nail every single tab in every single corner in order to fasten and secure each tab in place. I did have to install over 1,000 nails in just this one application alone, but in all honesty, this was more satisfying than anything else, because you were really securing every single tab down, and because it's a finish nailer, you're able to run that gun like none other and get it taken care of probably within an hour. Once you have everything fully secured, you do want to apply some type of caulk or paintable silicone around all the corners, as well as the doors and windows, especially the doors and windows. These are going to be areas where it's more prone to moisture, and using a good quality caulk or silicone that is paintable is key, especially when avoiding any type of moisture getting into the framework of the structure. I'm using a product that is actually paint ready in 30 minutes, because guess what? I want to start painting, and for painting I want to apply a good quality primer first to any bare wood. The bare wood is going to be actually right underneath our roof, as well as the roof rafters, of course. Because we're working overhead and it's going to be difficult to get into some of these tight-knit areas with a paintbrush, I decided to actually spray on the primer, which will make life a lot easier to get into all those miscellaneous corners. For the sprayer itself, I'm using the Wagner Flexio 3000, which I've actually used in multiple videos. And keep in mind, with any primer, you do want to check and make sure that it can actually also be applied to vinyl or PVC. We're not trying to prime our siding, but there's going to be obvious overspray since it's so close to the roof rafters. As for paint, we're going with Duration by Sherwin-Williams. This is a color that we actually used previously on the house, and the only thing you have to make sure of is that it can also be applied to vinyl or PVC products. This specific mixture does, and just like I did with the primer, I do add a small amount of water to the mix and mix it thoroughly in the sprayer. That way it just slightly reduces the viscosity of the paint and makes spraying a little bit easier. Having a sprayer like this really does make quick work of a project of this size. The one thing to keep in mind is the fact that I also want to spray this because it makes it a lot easier to get into some of those tight-knit corners in the shingles itself. Because those shingles have small slits down the side, it is sometimes difficult to get paint in there with just a paintbrush. But with a sprayer, you're really able to get in there nicely and evenly. After I spray, I do back brush all the shingles as well as those crevices, mainly because I want a nice consistent look of paint all the way across, and having a paintbrush just to get into those tiny nitty-gritty areas definitely helps in the long run. Takes a little bit of extra time, but well worth the effort if you want a beautiful finish. Now, I didn't paint the corners of the shed because I actually wanted to use the corners to prop up my ladder to get up in tight-knit areas and spray those down without having to worry about screwing up the finish of the paint. Then, once all the shingles were painted, I then went back and painted those corners evenly all the way across. As for the door, window, and fascia trim, we're actually going to be painting that a different color, which also matches the house paint. Just know that with black paint, you'll probably have to use 2 coats.
As for the roof, we could have gone with a number of different options. Of course, a shingle roof would have been easy, but it wouldn't have lasted long underneath large trees. If you don't believe me, just take a look at my neighbor's roof. Yeah, rough. Metal roof will really last a very long time, as well as very low maintenance, because all the vast majority of those pine needles and everything will brush right off. Just need to get it installed. Let's get to it.
This specific product is from New Ray, and the nice thing about their product as well as our shed is the fact that we didn't have to do any cuts with these panels. Each panel is approximately 36 inches wide, and they custom fit the length of these panels to the exact size of the shed, which is approximately 100 inches. There is also 4 trim pieces that we need to install, and the first one is called the hook eave trim piece. This basically acts as your drip edge for the entire roof structure, as all of the rain and moisture that hits this roof is going to be repelling down towards your hook eave. I nail that off with 3/4 inch galvanized nails and then align my panels as needed. I basically align every single panel with the front of the hook eave and then fasten a couple screws in place just to secure the first panel. These screws are specifically designed for this system, and they actually have a heavy-duty washer on the bottom side, therefore there's no chance of moisture getting underneath the screw head. Once I tag the first panel in place a couple times, I then get on top of the roof and install a few screws on the very top portion of every other panel. That will ensure there's no movement of these panels as I'm walking across them, and I would strongly suggest running a chalk line across the middle section of the panels in order for all your fasteners to be lined up properly. Yeah, I know no one's going to see the top of the shed most likely. No matter what, I want all these fasteners to be aligned perfectly across this roof. It's the little things that count sometimes. As you just saw, I stuffed foam trim in between the hook eave and the roofing panels. This foam is specifically designed for this system, and it prevents moisture from getting into the top surface, as well as any other rodents or other unique items that want to climb up into these channels. And as you can see clearly here, you do want to overlap these channels so they're actually connected into each other, and that's how these panels are hooked together and avoid any moisture from getting up underneath them. In these specific locations, you fasten both sides into the plywood, as well as one fastener through the top of each panel. There are also foam strips that correlate to the top of the roofing panels as well, but to make sure that they stay in place, I do apply a bit of roofing sealant to the top of the panels and then stick the foam in place. That way they won't move on me, especially while I'm maneuvering the trim over the top of the foam. The trim over the front as well as the back of the shed will be the next two pieces that we install. And for these two pieces, I left the lower end at a 90-degree angle exactly the way it came, but I cut the top section at the appropriate angle based upon my fascia. I'm using a grinder with a metal cutting blade to cut these sections, but you can also use your standard metal cutting snips. I make a mark approximately every 10 inches and secure a fastener on both the top as well as the lower lip level. This fully secures the metal gables in place, and due to the overlap on the roof, there's no way of water penetration underneath the metal panels. As for our last and final piece of trim, it's called out as the ridge cap. And for the ridge cap, we actually need to do a bit of cutting and molding to make sure it fits snugly in place, while also ensuring that no moisture is going to get through. We need to make a finished end cap on both sides, and the easiest way of going about this is to make a 1-inch mark on both the top and bottom of the flashing. Once you have that taken care of, figure out how wide your gable is, which in our case is 4.5 inches. I make that mark on the top section, and then I make a cross-dimensional line from our 4.5 inch gable mark to our 1-inch line. Once we have that, we can then grind or snip our way to that corner and cut that section off completely. However, keep in mind that we're only removing this side of the flashing. We're not going to be removing the other side, we're just going to be bending the other side in place. That way, both pieces will be able to connect nicely with our gables once we position them properly. To make our bend a little bit more even, I use a piece of wood to prop up on the finished side, as well as a clamp wrench to evenly distribute the bend properly on the entire seam. I apply a bit of roofing sealant into the crack so we know there's not going to be any leaks along the way, as well as a few fasteners. And as you can see, it's not the most beautiful, perfect seam that you can possibly imagine, but it protects the structure and it doesn't leak, which is exactly what we want at this point. Once we have that accounted for, go ahead and fasten all of your fasteners on the top ridge of your metal roof, and guess what? We are done! Sometimes you just don't know what you're going to get yourself into with a project of this magnitude until you do it, and I've built plenty of structures but never a shed. This was my very first shed project, and I'm proud to say that this is one well-built shed that will last for years and years. From the painting details to the metal roof to the windows, and of course our AZEK siding and trim, this shed should last generations, and I absolutely love how this project turned out. And as you all requested, I put a great deal of time and energy into creating plans for this shed build. So if you want to build this exact shed yourself, please check out the link in the description of this video for the free plans available to anyone. I even love the unfinished look of the interior of this shed just because of how beautiful it is. And as you can see, if you do use longer nails like I did at the very top, they will stick out. But everywhere else, no nails, no screws, just beautiful plywood. And that's what I call one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah.